Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly edition of the Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capital Bureau Chief.
And I'm Travis Fain, and I'm glad this election is almost over.
And we have one big thing to tell you. We are now going podcast only for this. We decided you probably were tired of looking at us on Zoom. I mean, who isn't tired of looking at people on Zoom? And so this is going to be podcast only content. And if you're hearing this, we hope you found your way to where you can find that podcast.
Yes, please subscribe, leave a comment, like, do all those podcast things anywhere you get your podcasts.
So as you said, we're very happy. The election's only a few days away. I'll tell you somebody else that's really happy about that. That's all the election officials that are running this thing. You got an update this morning about misbehavior at the polls, right?
Yeah, and it's not too bad. Like when you hear some of these individual things that either people are doing or people are complaining about, it sounds like children. But blessedly, thankfully, and hopefully this will continue. There's not a lot of it happening. We don't have the State Board of Elections told me this morning they were monitoring maybe about a dozen incidents around the state during early voting where it might have been a little bit of intimidation or harassment. I mean, look, one of those is too many, but 14 over 17 days of early voting is not a ton. 1.75 million people have voted. So it sounds like, fingers crossed, things are going well despite kind of heightened concerns this year that poll watchers might get aggressive or otherwise voter intimidation might be up.
Right, but we've heard that Wake, Durham, and Mecklenburg County have been singled out on Steve Bannon's show, right, by Cleta Mitchell?
Yeah, so Cleta Mitchell, who was one of the Trump legal team members who tried to overturn the 2020 presidential election, she, I guess, lives in North Carolina now, which I didn't know until recently. She's done quite a bit of training of poll workers around the country, including here in North Carolina. And I got sent a clip by the good folks at Triad City Beat. The good folks at Triad City Beat sent me a clip from Steve Bannon's show of Cleta Mitchell saying, we need people to do poll watching, to volunteer in various places like Maricopa County, for example, in Arizona. And she specifically mentioned Wake County, Durham County, and Mecklenburg. Honestly, I mean, most people have already voted that are going to vote in this election because most people early vote. So we're close here. Although you and I both know, Laura, regardless of what happens, if anything's close, the lawyers will descend upon us late Tuesday, early Wednesday to fight out anything that's close. So
Exactly. I mean, it may be that election day may be close to being, here, but this story is probably not over by any means at this point in the election. I will say so far, though, I know I mean, knock on wood, the election officials, I should say, were really concerned about what might happen this year with observers or poll watchers, and so it sounds like so far it's not been too much out of the ordinary.
yeah, and amen to that.
In the meantime, big news today, because who doesn't love a huge ruling dropped on a Friday afternoon right before Election Day? Leandro finally came down 4-3. Robin Hudson, who's departing the Supreme Court this year, this is her sort of final parting shot, perhaps. Sorry about that. Final parting shot, perhaps, on the court. 227 pages total, right?
Yeah, including the dissent. So yeah, a lot to digest. But I mean, basically, the Democratic majority on the state Supreme Court ordering the legislature to indeed transfer money to education funding. That process will be overseen by a lower court, so it's technically remanded back. And it's just a couple or 2 or 3 years of the Leandro plan. I mean, that's a longer plan. Emily Walkenhorst, at our colleague at WRAL, kind of going through this in detail. You find that on the website if you haven't already. And she had noticed it was just a few years of it, which was like 1.75 billion minus whatever budget increase education already got in this most recent budget cycle. So maybe more like 500 million, so less money. But I mean, the bottom line here is this is the judiciary ordering the legislature to spend money, and they're not going to like that. They're not going to just roll over for that. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I haven't seen statements yet from the speaker or Senator Berger.
I was just going to say that. I mean, it's 3:15. I mean, we've had this for about 4 hours now,
Yeah.
or so, and we have yet to see any statement come out from the NCGOP or from them. But I wouldn't be surprised if somehow this ends up at the U.S. Supreme Court again, because that's kind of where they've gone with the last couple of things that they didn't like from the state Supreme Court. I guess there's always some way you can find a hook to make something federal. That would be my guess.
Yeah, because I mean, basically the argument is that the court doesn't have this power. So it's similar to the case Moore v. Harper, where they're arguing the state Supreme Court doesn't have the power to deal with redistricting in North Carolina, at least not on federal races, congressional races. It sounds like a real similar vein of thought, right?
Right. It
Yep.
does sound very similar. Yeah, and also, yeah, and the gerrymandering too. So we will, yeah, we
I'm
will,
sure we got miles to go before we sleep. It seems like we
yeah,
always do. We
for,
we never seem to resolve anything.
for sure. And so, in the meantime, in non-election news, as there was a teeny bit of that this week, Governor Roy Cooper held a press conference on Tuesday to say that now this was the day after the Supreme Court heard arguments in that affirmative action case that involves UNC.
Right.
So he held this press conference to say that the UNC Board of Governors and the boards of trustees at the different schools are not sufficiently diverse to reflect the state and the students that they serve. So he is convening a bipartisan sort of blue ribbon panel to recommend changes and reforms to how those leaders are appointed, which is all well and good. He's got Tom Ross on there and Margaret Spellings, two people who are very much respected, in the world of higher education. But that leaves aside the problem that the governor is not in charge of that. The legislature is, and the legislature likes it the way it is because they're the ones who made it that way. And so there's no indication that no matter what this commission comes up with, that the legislature is actually going to take any notice of it.
Right. I mean, Speaker of the House Tim Moore immediately saying quite clearly there is no appetite to change the governance structure at UNC. So we'll see what this commission comes up with. I did see today, though, I think Colin Campbell reported it in his newsletter this morning, that House Republican Majority Leader John Bell has been asked to join the committee and agreed to it. So that's high up in the Republican infrastructure in the General Assembly, taking part in this.
Yeah,
Of
it
course,
is.
taking part in is not the same as endorsing whatever it comes up with. So 8 months, I think the governor said he wants an answer back in 8 months from this group as to how UNC and its various institutions, various campuses should be governed.
Also in non-election news, the disability lawsuit that came down this week. This was really big, right? Includes like three. Basically, this is for folks who are on ID or DD. There's a lot of those folks who have been waiting for services for years, and this case may get them, or this ruling may get them closer to getting there.
Right. I kind of think of this as Leandro for people with disabilities in North Carolina. This is a judge, Superior Court Judge Alan Badur. Is that how Badur?
Yeah.
He has basically said, look, y'all got to spend a lot more money on mental health and physical treating people, helping people with physical disabilities in this state. That waiting list for those ID/DD waivers is like 16,000 people long. It seems like every year, every couple of years, they add money to try to whittle away at that list. I think, I'm going off memory, forgive me, last time they whittled it down by 1,000. If 16,000 are still on it, that tells you the scale of the issue. I think it would cost something north of $1 billion to wipe out that list over, I think, the first few years. Plus, the judge has ordered that at least 3,000 people have to be moved from whatever facilities they're in now to more community-based programs. And of course, all this requires, we don't have enough people that actually work in this industry. We
Exactly.
have a shortage, the judge found, and I'm reading from Gary Robertson's very good breakdown of the case for the Associated Press, a shortage of well-paid direct care workers. That must also be addressed by the State Department of Health and Human Services, the judge ruled. So we cannot wave a magic wand and just put more people into this industry. We can offer more money, but that will cost a lot of money. And it's just going to be interesting to see how this goes. The Cooper administration may appeal this, which would be interesting given that on Leandro, they want the court to order the legislature to put more money into this. We'll find out if they want the court to put more money toward helping folks with disabilities through this case.
I can well imagine that even if the administration doesn't sue, legislators may, because this is, again, the same kind of thing that they're fighting in Leandro.
Yeah, ultimately, as I understand it, it's a court telling, in this case, the Cooper administration, but eventually it's the legislature with the power of the purse to put more money toward this. And again, it's big dollars. It's a lot of money.
To jump back into elections for a minute, it's of course the March of the Surrogates time, that time of year. And so this week we had a visit from Vice President Mike Pence, which was kind of interesting. He was coming to town to appear with Bud and Hines and sort of, his imprimatur. But you got to remember that most of the people who have been campaigning for Bud and Hines to date have been folks on the Trump side of things, Trump acolytes or Trump himself in some cases. Mike Pence obviously not on the Trump train, or at least from recent comments that he's made. It was an interesting choice of a person to come in and make the case.
Yeah, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in places where these decisions get made. Pence came in, he did a little rah-rah. They called it a fireside chat. There was no fire, but it was just a sit down at GOP headquarters here in Raleigh with Michael Whatley, the chairman of the party, and Ted Budd, mostly for volunteers. It was invite only too. So a handful, like for example, Tim Moore was there. But it was mostly young people, volunteers, a lot of selfies being taken, a lot of hands shook. A lot of pro Ted Budd stuff, but there was also a fundraiser. There's always a fundraiser, folks. If you take nothing else away from this, whenever one of these big dollar people comes in and there's a public event, there is at least one non-public event where very large checks are getting written. This one was co-hosted by Art Pope, who is the former budget director for Governor Pat McCrory. Y'all may remember former Governor
and a long time GOP donor as well.
Oh, absolutely. Big money guy for the GOP. Y'all may remember that McCrory lost to Bud, was trounced really in the GOP primary. So I guess that's probably an attempt to bring those McCrory voters and more specifically those McCrory donors home to Team Bud as we get toward the end of this election season.
It's very interesting to me. Anyway, in the meantime, on the other side.
Oh, wait. I meant to mention. So Speaker of the House Tim Moore and Donald Bryson, who is from the John Locke Foundation, they both met with Pence for like 30, 40 minutes, somewhere in there, maybe an hour, to talk economic policy. The speaker told me it was just they were wonking out basically, and that Pence is interested in what North Carolina has done. We're the #1 state in the country right now per CNBC for business. He's interested in what North Carolina has done on tax policy. As he's got his own foundation. He's considering Pence's 2024 run for president. He spoke very highly of North Carolina's policies. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some of that bubble up into whatever philosophies he espouses as he moves forward. But we'll see.
That'll be super interesting to watch, actually. Really. On the other side of things, we're going to point out that the surrogate in chief, who would be Obama, has not come to the state, and we've been kind of waiting to see if that was going to happen. Because as close as the polls look on Beasley and Budd, it sort of would be a logical place for him to come in and do a rally and get out the vote stuff. But you're hearing we're not going to see him.
I mean, we haven't seen anything announced. They could shock me and announce something, but I mean, he's in Philadelphia tomorrow, Saturday. The election's Tuesday. 1.75 million people have already voted. The hour grows late, and it blows me away that this nation's first Black president would not come to North Carolina to help elect the state's first Black U.S. senator. And Beasley strikes me as a strong candidate for Democrats. The public polling has shown this to be a close race, although I think it's also showing Bud to be pulling away by a couple of points.
Yeah.
The last several polls have been pretty clear to me that Bud is the clear favorite in this race. I don't know what internal polling is showing Democrats, but it can't be good if they're not kind of unleashing their strongest weapon here in Barack Obama. I can't think of anything that would do better for Democratic turnout in North Carolina than a Barack Obama visit. So I don't know. I did talk to one Democrat who said that the former president just kind of doesn't want to do political events and has only done them in this cycle in states that Joe Biden won in 2020, which would not be North Carolina.
And it's interesting. Chris Cooper out at Western Carolina, he's really great to watch on Twitter in run-ups to elections because he does a lot of sort of, data slicing and dicing, kind of like Mike Bitzer does down at Catawba. And he pointed out today that black voter turnout is down for this election, and that Republicans are actually turning out in higher numbers to vote early this time. So what we think we know about early voting versus day of voting may not be exactly right this year. But it said young voters and black voters are the ones who sort of seem to be lagging the most in this. And so that does sort of seem like it would be tailor-made for President Obama.
I started this week just assuming he'd come, and I guess I'm going to close it being a little shocked.
Being surprised. Being surprised.
I want to point out something else while we're talking federal races. The 13th district, our colleague Brian Anderson had a piece about Bo Hines earlier this week or late last week maybe, but Democrats really started passing around part of it and focusing on something that he said. And I'll read from Brian's story. Hines think abortion should be unlawful except in cases where a mother's life is at risk. He wants victims of rape and incest to be allowed to get an abortion on a case-by-case basis through a community-level review process outside the jurisdiction of the federal government. Of course, it did not take Democrats long to say, all right, so Bo Hines wants rape and incest victims to go before a panel to determine whether or not they can get an abortion. And they're really hitting that kind of late in the cycle here, as I am not surprised that they are. That would be
I mean, that
wild.
To be fair, that's certainly what it sounds like.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, they're not. They're using different words, but that I have seen not misdescribing his position.
Who would be appointing these people? And I mean, who would these people be? And I don't know. I just don't.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is not the best thought out idea I've ever heard in my life.
You're very kind, I think. Anyway,
you're the first person to say that in politics in North Carolina, Laura. Thank you.
Anyway, so in the meantime, though, you've been weeding through campaign finance reports, and there's a ton of money flowing into the state, and as always, it's difficult to follow. But it seems like there's the outside money, as it has last few elections, is continued to its trend of completely outpacing whatever the candidates are making.
Yeah, and I'll have a story that hopefully will be on NC Capital by the time y'all get this podcast. But I know, we have some policymakers that listen here, and having the final deadline to file the third quarter numbers, the big numbers, to be November 1st, and the election is already underway, and the election day is 7 days later, makes it a real tough turnaround to kind of follow that money. And then there are also 48-hour reports that get filed. If you get more than $1,000 after that final November 1st deadline, or after the period ends October 22nd, you have to file a 48-hour report if it's over $1,000, but those are not required to be filed electronically. So you can't pull a database of them. You have to pull each one individually. There were more than 400 over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, this makes no sense. Why in the world would this not be required to be filed electronically when everything else is?
Independent expenditures also aren't required to be filed electronically. It seems. Just look at it. So there's probably some work to be done there for people who are interested in transparency. I mean, it's going to be difficult to dig through no matter what. But you boys tired of looking at spreadsheets.
It doesn't have to be as hard as it is. It doesn't. And you do wonder sometimes when politicians fail to make these things more transparent, what their motives might be about that.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, so this would be the part of the podcast where we're supposed to go out on limbs and make predictions, but I don't think I'm going to do that.
I don't think I'm going to do it either, Laura. Everybody go vote. God bless people who run for office. God bless especially the people who run elections and give up their time and listen to some of these children complain and some of these baseless accusations they have to face. We appreciate you. We appreciate candidates who go out for office, and we appreciate voters. I do have one last thing, though.
Okay.
All right. So the Cooper administration, the Rules Review Commission, this is a legislatively appointed commission. So it's appointed by Republicans right now, and it can overturn rules set by the Cooper administration or any governor's administration. So legislature passes a law, but it needs some details filled in. The Department of Environmental Quality, or DHHS, writes more complicated rules, but then this commission can say yay or nay on those rules. Governor Roy Cooper had sued, saying, hey, that is a separation of powers issue. You're usurping my authority, one of several kind of separation of powers issues that were in court. This lawsuit was scheduled to be heard next Wednesday, so the day after the election. This week or late last week, the Cooper administration pulled the lawsuit. So that's not going to happen anymore, but they left the door open for refiling it. So I think you're going to see this lawsuit come back and kind of start over. And whereas the lawsuit was fairly broad, complaining about, hey, we think this is a problem, the next version of this lawsuit is probably going to be more specific based on what the Cooper administration said in its public statement about this. So a specific thing that the Rules Review Commission did that they're going to use as a wedge to try to get rid of the Rules Commission or change it. And this is me speculating now. Remember when the Rules Commission threw out the absentee ballot rule for this election that the state board, so the State Board of Elections, 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats unanimously voted on a timing change for absentee. I can't remember what the rule was. It had to do with absentee ballots. Rules Review Commission, dominated by Republicans, maybe all Republicans, said, nah, we ain't doing that. I'm guessing that ends up being the example that the Cooper administration points to try to wrest away this power from the legislature. And of course,
I just want to back up for a second. So the part about moving the deadline for the absentee ballots, that held, because that did not get challenged, because it did not get overturned, simply because that what would be the absentee deadline would have been on Veterans Day. So that would be problematic because there's no mail. But what they were fighting were some of the rules that they wanted to put in place regarding election observers for different parties and how often they could go in and out. They wanted to limit, the Board of Elections wanted to limit the inning and outing of these different observers because they say it takes up too much of the chief judge's time to keep track of who's there and who's not. And they wanted them to have to stay for 4 hours, and the Rules Review Commission and the NCGOP said, no, you can't make them.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you. And I think it's going to come to a head, it sounds like, but we'll see exactly what that lawsuit looks like when it comes out. And then we'll, hopefully we'll be up to our full complement of lawsuits, Laura. Y'all all know that if we don't have at least half dozen lawsuits ongoing at any given time in this state about real basic issues about how we run our government, I get antsy.
If you don't need a spreadsheet to keep track of them, it's not North Carolina, right?
Right.
Anyway, so just a word about election night. Now, WRAL will be broadcasting on continuous coverage on WRAL.2 and WRAL News Plus. If you haven't checked that out, you should. And also online, of course, you can watch as the results come in. Travis, you're going to be on TV all night doing your punditry.
That's right.
And talking to various other pundits via Zoom and et cetera, et cetera. I will be out in the field over at Sherry Beasley's event. That's going to be at the Sheraton in downtown Raleigh. I think we're going to see some other candidates make appearances there as well. So it'll be exciting. I bet you'll get better pizza than I will.
Oh, that sounds good. I like that.
Election night pizza, man. It's newsroom tradition. Anyway, all right, folks. Well, if you haven't voted yet, go vote, for heaven's sake. And we will probably catch up. We'll probably do a Wednesday edition of the Wrap to just look back at how things shook out.
Sounds like a plan to me. And remember, podcasts only. Click that subscribe or follow or whatever we call it these days.
Whatever it is, you kids. All right. Thanks a lot.